We are live. Hi, everyone. So we have Prashanth from LastBit. He's the co-founder of LastBit, and they are working heavily on Bitcoin Lightning. So I'm really looking forward to this session. Prashanth, stage is yours.
Thanks for the introduction, Anupam, and nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me as well. All right, so since we're a pretty small audience today and I have limited time, I'm going to try to, I've found that just a talk without any slides or presentations actually does better than trying to explain something over slides. So like Anupam said, I'm the founder and CEO of LastBit, and I want to try to keep this presentation about Bitcoin as a payments rail and what LastBit does and why we do what we do, and in general about how cryptocurrencies and blockchains can essentially be used as payments as a seamless mode of payments, right? So going back to myself, like I'd like to start with an introduction. So into the entire problem and why this whole space is exciting and why payments is probably one of the most exciting things that we find happening in the Bitcoin space right now, and why we want to work on it. So to start off, well, the problem is actually very easy to state, and I'm sure maybe some of you guys in the audience have faced this in the past. So I used to study computer science, and as a student, I'd moved to Switzerland to study. And one of the biggest problems, or one of the biggest challenges, was even though I had been working with Bitcoin for many years in my life until that point, and I had this wonderful, fantastic global currency that you could do things with, I actually couldn't do anything with it as a currency. And I had to spend an insane amount of money just converting between various European currencies from my Indian bank to a Swiss bank and then to various other currencies while I was traveling around Europe, right? And this really puts the reality of the problem in front of you, basically, like that even though you have these fantastic technologies like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general, you actually can't do anything with it. And the centralized system of banks is essentially a slow legacy system that is not the most suited financial system for the digital age, basically, right? And taking a step back to that as well. So one of the first promises that Satoshi made, or basically when the first version of the Bitcoin software was put out, it was basically branded as a version of peer-to-peer electronic cash. And the very first comment to that statement that Satoshi made was, we see the need for the system. However, we do not see the system scaling to the required size. And to put that in context, for example, a payment network such as Visa or MasterCard processes about 47,000 transactions per second, and Bitcoin processes 7. And there's a reason for that. Well, Bitcoin is not designed to be an insanely scalable or a really fast payment system. It was meant to be a form of peer-to-peer electronic cash. And to this day, it hasn't delivered on that promise, right? So since that started, a whole bunch of other cryptocurrencies and shitcoins and a whole bunch of other random projects have evolved from the space, attempting to solve this problem, essentially taunting Bitcoin, saying, okay, hey, this Bitcoin could not solve these problems, and we do solve this problem, and et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, this promise of peer-to-peer electronic cash is still not realized at all. And the starkness of the problem really lies in the fact that you can't do anything you can't do anything meaningful with cryptocurrency apart from trade it or hold it or hodl it, or one of these fancy terms you have. So essentially, this is exactly the problem that we faced, and myself and a team of early Bitcoin users got together and we realized, like, okay, this is actually a real problem worth solving. So I left my master's program and I started building this company called LastBit, which essentially aims to make Bitcoin a seamless global payment system, right? And the only way to do this, we realized, or based on what we've seen so far at least, is the current traditional fiat payment system is not going to vanish overnight. Banks are not going to shut down, and governments are not going to dissolve and just vanish. So what needs to be done is, like, the first step towards anything relevant to the crypto space, irrespective of what dApps or like whatever it is that you're building, the only group that's restricted to is a very small developer-focused community that's essentially extremely limited, and it's very, very hard to grow that into any sort of meaningful business or have any sort of meaningful impact at this point in time, right? And we face this, we realized the problem the hard way again when, as a young company, you go and try to raise funds, and it's impossible to try to defend to any venture capitalist how you're planning on building a venture scale business. And this, again, irrespective of whether it's a business or not, it's about getting it. This whole thing only works when there's enough people using the system or Bitcoin in general, right? So statistically, there's less than 1% of the entire planet that holds Bitcoin or has Bitcoin today. So there's still 99% of the population that has no idea that a form of decentralized peer-to-peer currency exists, or can actually do things outside of. That a form of currency exists that can do things outside of what you're used to seeing on a day-to-day basis, right? So what we're trying to build is essentially this super seamless on-ramp and off-ramp to Bitcoin, specifically using the Lightning Network. Going back to my point about how Bitcoin was slow. Well, this is a fundamental limitation of all blockchains. A very stupid and naive way, a naive proposal to fixing this problem is a block size debate, which some of you may be familiar with, which essentially proposes increasing the size of Bitcoin blocks to accommodate more transactions within every single block that's mined every 10 minutes, right? While this seems legitimate at first, it's probably it's an extremely naive and a linear scaling solution that will simply not work. And there's plenty of statistical significance to essentially validate this, and there's many research papers on this. And that's outside the scope of this presentation. I won't get into it. But at the end of the day, Bitcoin needed a way more robust or a way more scalable scaling solution, something that's not limited in essence, or that does not have severe drawbacks, or something that would compromise the very essence of Bitcoin. That's basically decentralization or removing power from any central authority. If you had much larger blocks, you would have much lesser, you'd have a lot more concentrated mining power, which essentially defeats the entire purpose of Bitcoin. So you have a whole bunch of other shitcoins that basically promise to solve this exact same problem by making one compromise or the other, which is essentially compromising on the decentralization aspect of things, or by making a larger block size, right? So around this time, this whole debate was going on. Actually, a few years prior to that, a bunch of really smart people came up with this cool idea called the Lightning Network, which was essentially which essentially took the concept of a very basic blockchain such as Bitcoin and presented a scaling solution, which since its inception, which was about 5 or 6 years ago, and the way it's evolved today, is probably the most exciting thing that's happening with Bitcoin and the most promising thing to solve this fundamental limitation of Bitcoin, right? And the proposal is really simple, right? So you have the Bitcoin blockchain that's the source of truth. It's been around since 2009. Nobody's been able to tamper with it. There have been no severe hard forks. Obviously, there have been no severe implications to the security or the promises of Bitcoin in itself, right? Now, taking that fundamental property of Bitcoin, that it actually is decentralized and that it actually is immutable, why does every single participant on the Bitcoin blockchain need to know when somebody makes a transaction? It's like, for example, if I'm making a transaction to a coffee shop on a daily basis, why does anybody else on the blockchain need to know about this transaction except for myself and the coffee shop? The two of us are the only people involved in these transactions, and our balances are the only balances that are involved in this transaction, right? And looking back at it, this proposal is very fundamental. It's very simple, right? When you make a transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain, a regular on-chain transaction, you're essentially broadcasting it to the entire network. You wait for the entire network to confirm it, and that's where the latency stems from. If you didn't have the entire network to confirm it, obviously the latency is lesser, but then it becomes mutable. Your blockchain becomes mutable, right? So what Lightning what Lightning proposes is when people make payment, like when two people make payments between each other, why can't the Bitcoin blockchain be the source of truth? Because it's been around for this much time and it's been proven to be mutable and secure. This basic blockchain should be like the underlying layer that's like this basic source of truth. And then on top of that, people can essentially use what Bitcoin already has as a property to build a payment system that's basically instantaneous. And the only people that are involved in the transaction are the two people transacting themselves, right? So, for example, like in a it uses a lot of internal Bitcoin mechanics, which I won't get into again. But in a very simple scenario, let's assume I'm going to go to a coffee shop and buy a coffee from this person every single day, right? So I'm just gonna I'm essentially gonna give him an IOU every single time I buy a coffee, saying like, okay, hey, I have. I'm going to okay, so when I first go into the coffee shop, I'm going to make this setup transaction, or rather I'm going to put in some money into like a shared account that's between myself and the coffee shop. And let's say I put in like 1 Bitcoin in this account, right? And then the next day when I go and I'm going to give him 0.1 Bitcoin, and then I keep exchanging these small payment packets with this merchant, and essentially he gives me the service of the coffee. And the latency of this payment system is essentially limited to the latency that comes with exchanging network packets, and that can essentially theoretically scale up to like millions of transactions per second. But that's not the point here. Like this argument about transactions per second is absolute BS, but that's again not the point here. The point is that the idea behind Lightning is basically, it's super simple, it's super straightforward, and it uses like the existing fundamental properties of Bitcoin and actually puts it and makes it again an innovative way of scaling a decentralized system such as blockchain that has, decentralized system such as Bitcoin that uses this fundamental property of blockchain. So the word Bitcoin and blockchain go hand in hand. There is no blockchain without Bitcoin, and anybody else that tells you so is probably bullshitting you. So so with that in mind, so Lightning started evolving as this cool idea between a bunch of researchers and developers started writing like a very basic implementation of this, about people essentially creating these payment channels between one another and being able to exchange small payments of a few satoshis in exchange for a particular good or service. And again, the latency of exchanging these payment packets was limited to a couple of, limited to literally the speed of the internet in exchanging a packet, right? And then as this was proven to work, the idea for Lightning evolved into something much more. It's basically evolved into something along the lines of a network, wherein if I want to pay a coffee shop, I don't necessarily have to, like, I should be able to walk into any coffee shop on the planet and just make a simple payment to them, like an instant Bitcoin payment, without them actually having a direct channel open with me, or me having to open a channel with this person. And when I say open a channel, I mean essentially depositing money into like a shared account with this person to be able to start making payments to this person, right? So what Lightning evolved into is essentially something that's very similar to Tor. So Tor is this Tor is a protocol that basically allows users to access the deep web, among other things. But it essentially is a routing protocol that has a whole bunch of relay nodes, and packets are routed between various anonymous participants on a network. And that's exactly what Lightning is in very layman terms. But the state that it's in today is actually very analogous to the state of Bitcoin in 2009. It's something that actually works. There's like over 13,000 Lightning nodes. That's way more than the number of Bitcoin nodes, and we can actually start making these instant payments. But it's still limited to an insanely small community of developers and people that actually understand the internal mechanics of Lightning and Bitcoin, because there are significant risks to locking up your funds on within channels and not understanding what you're doing exactly. So the state that it's in today is that you can, like, it's for the first time, like, this statement is probably the most exciting thing that keeps us working on a day-to-day basis. For the first time in the history of electronic money, two people on the planet can exchange value with each other without needing any third parties, without needing any registration or any banks, and do it instantaneously. Now, that's an insanely powerful statement that you can use to build all sorts of crazy products and services, and you can combine it with existing financial institutions and existing payment technologies to build something truly different. And different does not mean ideal. Obviously, you do compromise on a few ideals, or you do have to make compromises based on what you want to build. So Lightning exists today. Anybody, if the entire world understood the need for a fantastic new financial system with the best, let's say, with the best privacy and security, every single person on the planet would be using it, and nobody would have to build companies anymore, right? But going back 5 steps, what we wanted to do, or what I really wanted to build, was this essentially like this payment system. But the first problem before even building a payment system was that, okay, there's only like 1% of the planet that holds Bitcoin. How do you get the other 99% to actually start using Bitcoin? How do you get these people aware of it? It's really naive to expect somebody to learn what a mnemonic is, what a seed word is, how you derive your hierarchical addresses and store your keys, and how you manage your keys, what the risks are with putting funds into channels and managing your channels inbound capacity and all that stuff, right? Especially in India, like, India actually has one of the best payment systems on the planet. Like with UPI, everybody's insanely spoiled, where you literally expect to open an app and make a payment and it's instant and that's it. Now we needed a way to get Bitcoin to that level of usability. And the only way that's going to happen is by working with existing financial players and building a bridge between fiat currencies and cryptocurrencies. There's no way. I mean, if you're going to try to get a buddy into Bitcoin, there's no way you're going to explain to him how to set up a mining rig and start mining Bitcoin himself. So there has to be this simple gateway to essentially move between cryptocurrencies and fiat currencies, Bitcoin and fiat currencies, in this case. And for those people that actually get onto Bitcoin, now how do you give them the most seamless possible Bitcoin experience without needing to understand any of the underlying technical complexities, right? And when I say start understanding the underlying, start using Bitcoin in its like simplest way, it basically means starting to use not just using like regular on-chain transactions, but actually being able to access Lightning and use it as though it was an inbuilt feature of Bitcoin, without like actually abstracting away that it's not on the Bitcoin blockchain, but it's just a second layer. So ideally, you want to build. You need, like, somebody still has to build that, because it's a completely open space. Somebody has to build this UPI like interface, or like this UPI like system for Bitcoin, if you will, right? So the simplest way to get into Bitcoin and the simplest way to get off Bitcoin, and that's exactly what LastBit does, and that's exactly what we've been. That's sort of the problem we narrowed down on. And prior to doing this, we went through a whole bunch of iterations. We were actually building a hardware device. Like we assumed that, okay, every single person on the planet cares about their privacy and their security, and that's like the most paramount thing. And hardware wallets are going to be hardware wallets are a key component. If anybody holds Bitcoin, I would strongly recommend getting a hardware wallet, but that's besides the point. We wanted to build a device that could essentially do payments, but it's like a few years ahead of its time. Most people don't really understand the need for privacy and security. And the most basic problem that all cryptocurrencies, or any network, or any blockchain, or any coin in essence needs to essentially first solve is, how do you get more people aware of this thing? Like most people don't understand the need for these things, right? So what we're essentially building is the most seamless possible on-ramps and off-ramps to Bitcoin through Lightning. So this means you essentially, like, what we strive to build, like what it's, the status in is getting there, but what it's gonna look like is this super simple UPI-like interface where you essentially you're able to get onto Bitcoin with a couple of clicks, and you're able to get off of Bitcoin with a couple of clicks as well, and be able to pay Lightning invoices, receive funds on Lightning, make on-chain transactions, receive funds on-chain, be able to add funds to your own virtual debit card or your physical debit card, and then spend funds in the real world starting from Bitcoin, or pay Bitcoin invoices with your debit card. So basically, there's this completely seamless, interoperable layer between fiat currencies and cryptocurrencies, and all of this is only possible because of Lightning. Like I said, prior to Lightning being invented, you could not actually build that coffee shop transaction. Like, you could not build a payment system where people would actually use it. Even if you built, like, Bitcoin existed, people could walk into a shop and pay for things with Bitcoin and buy a coffee, for example. But just imagine going into a shop and waiting for 1 hour to get your transaction confirmed. And yeah, there are these whole bunch of people that say, oh, we can use zero confirmation transactions, but no, that's a very stupid argument. And there's been plenty of, it's very, very, it's very easy to fool an unknowing person when you accept a zero confirmation transaction. So basically, this means that you would have to wait for at least one confirmation on the Bitcoin blockchain prior to Lightning, or any other blockchain for that matter, right? And the cool thing about Lightning is it's not a random. I mean, it doesn't spawn a random shitcoin. It doesn't promote some random need. It's a very simple. It's a complex solution, but a very simple theoretical solution to a very simple problem. And it essentially would work with any underlying cryptocurrency that has the same internal mechanics as Bitcoin. Essentially, it requires a few opcodes that Bitcoin enables, such as SegWit and Operaton and things like that. So sorry, not Operaton, but a few other opcodes basically. So Lightning is actually scalable too. I mean, it can actually work with other cryptocurrencies. It actually does work on Litecoin, but Litecoin doesn't need Lightning at the moment. But the promise of these instant transactions actually enables the use case of cryptocurrencies to be used as a payments rail. And in our case, as an example, like, we're solving a very tiny fraction of a very massive problem, and that tiny fraction is essentially being able to use Lightning to facilitate payments in the real world that are perceived as fiat currencies to end users. And fiat currencies is something that end users are familiar with. And the goal of this whole thing is to eventually get enough people to understand that, okay, this thing is actually working on Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is this cool thing and you don't need fiat currencies anymore. That's how you transition a world that's built on fiat currency into something like Bitcoin. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen with the promise of a new random coin or something that's been untested and something that's partially centralized. And there's been a lot of ups and downs in this space. And I mean, literally, like, I've been working with Bitcoin since I was 21 or so, and the sheer number of things, like the sheer number of promises and coins and all the other random things that you see, like, Bitcoin is the only one that's basically stood through this test of time, and all of the other, like, Bitcoin is actually, like, this is impenetrable fortress, and that's the most exciting thing. So if there are any, like, developers in this chat and stuff, I mean, I'm not preaching anything here. Like, I would just strongly suggest checking out. I mean, it's obviously way easier to get, like, if you're a programmer, it's way easier to see tangible results. Like, every programmer loves seeing tangible results. They love seeing their code do something in front of them, and it's way easier to get started with something like Solidity, or, like, basically write a smart contract, which is cool. It does you can get some cool results out of it. But at the end of the day, if you're really trying to, like, if you're a programmer interested in this space, I would strongly recommend checking out Bitcoin and Lightning. This is, like, an insane opportunity here to capitalize on these early, like, this is probably the earliest stage of Lightning. Like, now is when Lightning started to take off. So if you guys are interested, just check out the C Lightning repository, or, like, just Google Lightning and find something, and you'll probably come up with, like, once you get set up with it, you would ideally start getting so many ideas that you would probably end up building something really cool on top of Lightning as well. And more recently, I actually saw a whole bunch of Lightning startups emerging, and some of them are from India as well. Like, there's this pretty cool startup called GoSats that came across my radar recently, which is building something very cool for India, and I'm curious to see how that turns out, actually, because it again goes back to solving one of these massive fundamental problems that are being attempted to solve, that are attempted to being solved in the West, but not in India yet. So I guess that's it from me. So a small takeaway is, if you're a developer, go check out like the Lightning Network and Bitcoin in general, and try to familiarize yourself with that stuff, because there's, like, way more potential there, and there's, like, a ton of stuff that can be built on this stuff right now. So I'm open to taking any questions if you guys have some.
Hey, thanks, Prashanth. That was pretty insightful. There are a couple of questions coming. What are the biggest challenges for Lightning adoption today?
All right, so The absolute biggest challenge is that it's essentially in the exact same state that Bitcoin was in 2009. It's this obscure thing that you use from the command line, and most people don't really understand. It's focused on this very small developer community. So, like a very good example for this is a company like Coinbase. Like Coinbase got to the stage it is today, basically solving this exact problem for Bitcoin. If you go back and look at their initial pitch deck on how they raised their first round of funding, they basically showed a screenshot of the Bitcoin command line and said, like, this is what Bitcoin is today, and we turned it into this cool user interface thing that people can get started with easy. So the biggest challenge to adoption for Lightning is essentially to get people to understand it in the simplest possible way. Like, there's no way people are going to like understand how to use Lightning. So there's a whole bunch of from a user experience perspective, there's a whole bunch of stuff that can be built on top.
Right. Yeah. What's this is a Telegram question. What's your opinion on other cryptocurrencies that are instant and free? Like there is Nano, there is Bitcoin Cash. They're pretty okay. Maybe not Bitcoin Cash. I would probably Nano. That's fast, instant, and really high speed and a lot of transaction per second. Also
Centralized.
Nano is centralized. Okay, yeah. I mean,
so it's see these things are these are like extremely subjective and opinionated answers and questions. But I mean, but the at the end of the day, like these may or may not be the next solution. Like it's insane. It's amazing to see such innovation in the space. And as soon as any of these coins can essentially stand the test of time that Bitcoin has stood, then it proves itself. There's no need for evangelists or other people to essentially validate these things. There was no spokesperson for Bitcoin. There was no like marketing team for Bitcoin, right? So when there's other cryptocurrencies that are essentially fast and free, I mean that's insane, right? I mean, if you have a cryptocurrency that's so amazing, fast and free, then everybody on the planet should be using it. And if everybody on the planet is using it, that's amazing. That's great. They achieved the goal. So that's pretty much my opinion on it. I mean, no real massive opinion on these things. Like if it can solve a real problem and people end up using it, that's fantastic.
Right. What do you have to say for people who argue that Bitcoin can only be used as store of value? Is it something that they're missing out? Like they don't know about Lightning, perhaps, but because they just say that it can only be used as it's a digital gold and it can only be used as a store of value.
Well, the thing about it, like I would propose this very simple argument. Imagine like so today the price of Bitcoin is completely arbitrary and bespoke. Like there is absolutely zero basis for why it's worth what it's worth, and that can actually probably be shown by just based on market manipulation or like a lot of whales trading. So just imagine the situation where every single person on the every single person on the planet has Bitcoin and is just holding on to it and does absolutely nothing with it. Is this valuable at all? It's going to drop to zero. It's going to be something that's completely useless. It's at the end of the day, Bitcoin was, again, like I said, like Satoshi did put the first software. Like he himself, like the promise was to be a form of peer-to-peer electronic cash. And the fundamental premise for Lightning in itself is the fact that you can make these instant microtransactions, that people use it to do things. And the reason I would say it's not digital gold is it does not have any of the properties that gold has. It's basically it's not physical, right? And you would say like, okay, if I had small gold nuggets, would I go into the supermarket and exchange it? That's what people used to do. And then you had fiat money, and the government held the gold. And there's a whole bunch of the way the financial systems evolved is because of this. So the price of Bitcoin is something like you get used to over a period of time. Like to newer Bitcoin users, most people come into Bitcoin just because of its price primarily. But this narrative of a store of value is true to a certain extent. But there has like the payments without the payments use case, that narrative is incomplete.
Yeah. Just one last question from my side. Last time I met you, you were working on the hardware wallet, like you mentioned also in your talk. So I would just like to know, why did you drop the idea completely?
So we didn't actually drop it. We just essentially like paused it. So we actually built so what we were going to try to build was a device that could manage your Lightning keys, and you would be able to walk into a shop, tap the device against a credit card machine, and that device would essentially store your keys, convert your Bitcoin to fiat currencies, emulate a virtual debit card, and pay the merchant in the real world.
Right.
Now, what we realized, like we actually ended up building a prototype of this thing, and we quickly realized that, well, building a hardware company is stupidly hard. First, secondly, raising funds for a company like that is even harder, and thirdly, even if we managed to finish solve the first two problems, like successfully set up like a whole production line, which is not that hard, like we would have been able to do that. But the point was that the size of the market, like the number of people that actually cared about privacy and security was insanely tiny. There's no way to justify a venture scale business. I can't imagine, I could not justify to a venture capitalist, can I imagine every single person in the world walking around with a special device to manage their keys and make a payment? Basically, as much as the need for hardware wallets exist, maybe this would be the reality 5 years from now. But this was one of those things that's it's super cool to have, but it's not a necessity at this point.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks a lot, Prashant, for taking our time, man. Really appreciate it. And it was a great session.
No worries. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Yeah,
All
bye.
right. All right. Bye, guys.